Hello and welcome to the CBB SuperShow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka the Dub Deuces 85, niche sports connoisseur, out here doing our thing, college basketball DFS and betting opportunities. It is officially into February, week one. It's the first weekend of February. We're washing away the grind and the stink of January, and it's full steam ahead. Subs are loving it. Our community members are turning the corner. The switch has been flipped, as we say. I've got a million different catchphrases like I'm a WWF wrestler, but the switch has officially been flipped, and we are doing well heading into a big day, Saturday hoops. 9-game main slate. That's going to be the focus of tonight's show. There's also an 11-game afternoon slate and a 6-game night set over on DraftKings. So 3 slates to choose from. We're going to grind them all. Projections all day long for them. There'll be some FanDuel coverage as well. Their big top-heavy contest that they've got, I believe, at the $9 level. There's also a Mania qualifier at the $30 level. So there's something for everyone here this weekend. T9, my friend. Hello. Appreciate it. Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. And everybody, we can take this moment to help out not only myself, but the FTN network as a whole. Dropping a like on the YouTube channel here and subscribe if you're not already subscribing. Get those notifications up, not only here, but also on all social media platforms, especially on Twitter/X at DubDeuces85. That is where you can find me posting all of the injury news, my thoughts, my tilts throughout the games in the day, and also any other relevant stuff that's going on. Very sports related for all the needs you need there in the collegiate space. Also talk a little bit about other things too that come up on my mind, but for the most part, I'm your guy for those collegiate sports. You may have noticed the intro and the song set at the beginning of the show are no more. We are working through some changes and hopefully can have a new intro and music and all of that stuff done up, working on that. But for now, uh, it's the meat and the potatoes right here, and we're going to get you some great information. Tonight went solidly for a few of our subs who were in a little bit of a cold streak. Admittedly, a lot of people in and out of our community have told us the same. But it was good to see some of those guys get off the schneid there. It's also a very good slate on Tuesday for me personally, and we've had some really good overall results here as we enter into February and really full steam ahead as we get to conference tournaments, March Madness, Selection Sunday, One Shining Moment, all of that good stuff. There's lots of opportunities here for us to absolutely go berserk. All right, let's get right into this. Let's do this 9-game set. So I'm going to go game by game here. This is what I typically do if you're new to the show. Basically, talk a little bit about who I think is DFS relevant, any DVP stuff, matchup stuff. We'll have a projection screen up to look at and follow along as I'm talking. And then we'll just work our way down through the list. I will also present with you a 3-man core, which will be the focus of basically a main team, and that could be single entry stuff, that could be cash games, that could be high dollar, whatever you play the most of. And if you have one lineup to rule them all, that is what this core is going to be about. Also have some prize picks plays that I looked at prior to the show that I feel pretty confident in, and then a couple of best bets as well. Betting is heating up. Not only our man Mike Randall, our man Gus, Frank Brank, all of the great content providers that we have on the betting side, but also yours truly. We are hitting our stride and really taking advantage of some soft props. Earlier today, we had the Kaderi Richmond over 20.5 PRA. Now, Mike Kutry, my man, the myth, the legend, who's no longer with FTN, but he's doing his thing. We still talk. He's my friend. Last year told me the PRAs are horrible, and they are for the most part. But when you had a Kaderi Richmond 20.5 PRA, I just couldn't get away from that one on FanDuel. So that one treated us nice and little taste here as we hit into the weekend. All right, let's jump in. Let's get this going. First game on the slate here, Tennessee versus Oklahoma. This is a total of 138.5. Tennessee is a 5-point favorite as they go on the road here. Let's get it put up. Blump, blump. Layout 7. Where are you? There you are. My man Brett Belky. All right, before I get into it, since Brett showed up, because it's late for my man from Minnesota, and he still heard about that Huskies win. Looking forward to those window trips and green screens. Yes, sir. I got a shirt prototype of that I'm gonna be getting made, and I might try to sell some T-shirts with that on it. Not for like more than a couple bucks just to ship it or whatever, but getting into the merchandise game here with some of my catchphrases in 2-bit, 8-bit, all that fun stuff. But it's good to see Brett Belky. I don't know if you guys are old like me. There was a show in the late 80s, early 90s called Perfect Strangers. And one of the characters was named Balky. And when I first met Brett, I called him that. And I'm not sure if he really recognized what it was, but he quickly did figure it out. And that is my name for him now, Balky. Where must have been like 10 seasons of that show. And if you're into pop culture like I, maybe not so much as now, but was, then obscure things like that, you'll know. I won a pop culture bowl in like 2005, answering with a picture of Antonio Sabato Jr., and not from his boxing days, but from his soap opera days. Not that I had seen any of his soap operas, but it's just one of those things that you just know. So one of my own shining moments there. But good to see you, Balky. Glad that you got away from your really stringent and stressful filming schedule over there on Perfect Strangers to check in with us and hang out here tonight. All right, getting into it. Tennessee. This is a big spot for them. They were a little bit, punched in the mouth there early by Missouri, coming off of a, absolutely just kind of an atrocious loss to Kentucky for the most part, I would say. But that Missouri game, they really got slapped in the mouth on that one. They did end up winning 85-81, and Zakai Zeigler finally got hot. We had mentioned, man, this guy does so good with his peripherals. If he ever got hot from deep and made his shots, he was going to bust the slate. And he didn't quite put up some huge 50 or anything, but 37.75 on DK, thanks to 4 of 4 from downtown. The previous 3 games, he had made only 2 threes, and that was on 21 attempts. 4 for 4, that's a big deal for this guy Zeigler. And you're going to need to do that here against a deceptively good Oklahoma defense. That Missouri game was weird, the rotation. They were playing true freshmen and redshirt freshmen that had been basically playing like 1 minute every 5 to 10 games, and they were all playing and they were all scoring at will against Tennessee. It was a very bizarre game to watch. Zeigler back in play. He's a little spendy for my taste at 8'9". You can see here on the Tennessee side, he never really always projects all that well, but he plays all those minutes. He's very safe. Usually I like to look at him when he's in that low 8K range, but 8'9", it's acceptable. There is some cheaper pricing on the slate. We can make it happen if we want to go there, but I don't think I'm going to pull the trigger on him. Igor Milicic up to 8K. He's been pretty chalky on slates lately, producing quite well, going up against a endless supply of Oklahoma front court bodies that they have. A little bit worried there for him in terms of foul trouble. Chaz Lanier projects decently, but I'm not really feeling Chaz too much. Shot attempts are there. Usage is there, but he's been bricking a lot of shots as well. He is priced at a relatively cheap 6-7, but I'm just not confident in him for main team looks right now, especially on a slate that includes my boys from UCF and Iowa and Kentucky, all these teams that we usually stack for and against. So it doesn't leave us a lot of room for a game like this, or at least for me personally. We did see Darlington Dubar play a bunch of minutes in the game without Zakai Zeigler. He went back to playing under 10 last game. That's pretty tough. Jordan Gainey did still play over 30 minutes despite Zeigler being back. He's priced at 5'7", and then you have Jemai Mashak at 4'9", playing 25-plus minutes as well. So you have some decent enough value in a game like this to look at, but I think Tennessee guys are mostly a kind of meat and potatoes type of play, right? There's not a lot of sexiness there. There's not a lot of glitz and glamour. I don't know that they're going to help you win a large field GVP, but they won't hurt your chances either. I just don't know that we're going to get so much further over a 3.5 to 4x number. And I think we're going to need more than that on this slate. This doesn't strike me as one that we're going to need 300 to win. Doesn't strike me as one that's going to be like in the 150s. Somewhere in the 250 to 260 range feels like the sweet spot for this slate. On the Oklahoma side, Jeremy Fears brother, the Fears brothers, they're pretty good, eh? He is questionable officially here after dealing with an injury against Auburn thought maybe it was just his pride, but maybe not. Only played 25 minutes in that game, shot 1 of 8. He's a really young player. He's an absolute star in the making. But it does seem like in my first run through of the intranet that Fears is trending more doubtful than probable on his questionable tag. So we'll see what happens there. Tennessee isn't quite to like a Houston level or Virginia of the last few years, not this season, mind you, but the last couple where, we really didn't target against them too much, slow pace, elite defense, that kind of thing. Tennessee's not quite to that level. They're definitely a great defense, and I'm not going to sit here and stack up Oklahoma on the account of Fears maybe missing out, but there is some usage opportunities and minutes opportunities here for the various players. And when you throw out Jalen Moore, who's priced at $7K, and he's been pretty damn good, and you've seen the projections at 34 minutes, he does project pretty close to 30, and I do think he can get that against Tennessee, being that if Fears is out, he's going to get a lot of the usage in a variety of ways. But everybody else is under 6K. Duke Miles, Bryson Goodine, Dalton Forsythe, and Glenn Taylor. Those are the 4 I'd expect to get a pretty nice boost. You also have Kobe Elvis by way of DePaul, the transfer, who early in the season was playing pretty heavy minutes, 30+, pretty much ineffective in this program. You have to be able to not only be somewhat efficient to see floor minutes, but also play a high level defensively. And Elvis hasn't been able to do that. He's also been turning it over a lot. But the potential there for him to play 20+ minutes at 3.6 is definitely there. I think we'll see some popularity for Dayton Forsythe, who has played 22+ minutes in 3 straight games, and he has scored double digits in all 3. The big game that he dropped against Vanderbilt, 14 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. He had 3 steals, hit a couple of threes, really showed out in that blowout win over them. And then got some blowout run against Auburn, got to the foul line 11 times where he made all 11 of those free throws. So Forsythe has already kind of been pushing his way into more minutes over the likes of a Bryson Goodine and over the likes of a Kobe Elvis, but now you might be taking out a key component to the offense, to the program in general, and it does make Forsythe kind of interesting, especially since against Auburn, who's a very tough opponent, because of that garbage time, he pushed his way to about 14 to 15 fantasy points, and he took 8 shots. Now, he only made 1 of them, but that was some pretty big volume there for Dayton Forsythe. So I'm definitely interested there based on that news. Lucky for us, it's one of the first games of the day. We have that first window here. Was it 3 games in the first window? So a little bit spaced out, but we'll be able to get that news on those first 3. And there is a little bit in the Kentucky side as well. So we'll process all of that at the same time and be ready for it like we were the other day in that crazy, crazy Tuesday and Wednesday slates that had so much news. As far as rates go on Oklahoma, Fears has a 32% usage rate, which is top 20 in the country, and a 27.5% shot rate. His assist rate is also 30%, which is top 85. So that's a lot of production, a lot of usage, a lot of shots that they're going to have to try to replace. When you look at it, Elvis shot rate around 20.2%, Duke Miles around 19.5%, Jalen Moore up to 27.2%. He's a pretty appealing one, and Moore can bang down low. He's not afraid down there, but he's also shooting 43% from long range on 67 attempts. That is a top 100 percentage on make rates. And then you have Forsythe here shooting 39% from long range, the true freshman who's really, early in the season didn't get a lot of playing time, but has been in conference. Overall, his shot rate's about 16%, but in the conference games here, especially lately, that number is much closer to 20%, and he has an assist rate that's pushing up towards 20. The Auburn game, a 28% usage rate, Vanderbilt, 21% usage rate. And then you go back in a game that they blew out Alcorn State on December 7th, by a score of 94-78. In that one, Forsythe played 27 minutes off the bench, 26% usage rate. He had 14 points, hit 4 of 10 from long range, 7 assists with the bench unit and in garbage time. Yes, it was against Alcorn State, but it shows you Dayton, this kid can play a little bit, and he's going to be a big part of their program in the near future here under Coach Porter Moser. Defensively, he's going to have to do some work, of course, to get minutes in this program, but I think he's going to be able to hold his own. He does have a steal rate just under 3%, and Dayton Forsythe is a potential candidate to start here if Fears is out. So that's my spiel there on Forsyth. When you look at the various projections here, Jalen Moore, 34 minutes again, he projects the best. Then you get into Forsyth, tentatively at about 23 minutes, puts him somewhere between 3.7, 3.8. But it's just, that's kind of on the low end projection. If he were to start, we might get somewhere closer to, maybe, I don't know, 28 minutes perhaps. And then that puts us into a gotta have it type of value. So we'll keep an eye out on that. If that is the case, he's going to be relatively popular. Whoever ends up being the starter over Fears will have ownership. Can look to Kobe Elvis at 3.6. Even if he comes off the bench, theoretically he should get minutes. Glenn Taylor is there at 4.3. Yes, he's more of a wing, but he does have ball handling capabilities as well. And then, of course, Bryson Goodine, who is more of a shooter at heart, but definitely would get some more shots up. And if you look at Goodine, he does project pretty close to 4x as well. So some various value pieces that we can look at here for Oklahoma. It is not a situation where I want to be stacking them, but I do want to play one. If I'm going to more, I'm probably just fading the value in this one. If I'm not playing more, then I want a value piece here, but only if Fears ends up being out. In a game like this where I do think, yeah, it's only a 5-point spread, I do think that there is a big chance Tennessee runs away with this game, actually, as we get into the early second half. So this is a betting opportunity here for Tennessee, -5, pretty much at full strength for the most part. If Fears is out, I think that this is going to be a pretty tough one for Oklahoma to deal with. All right, we're going to move on to the next game here. Of course, I'm losing. There we go. Lost my document. South Carolina versus Kentucky. Total of 151.5. Kentucky games, usually fantasy friendly. Kentucky is an 11.5 point favorite at home, but I would be a little bit surprised if they cover that. Yes, South Carolina has clearly been the worst team in the SEC, but that's basically near the middle of the pack or even near the top in most other conferences. Remember, way back in mid-December, when they played Clemson as part of their challenge there, and they beat them on Clemson's floor 91-88 in overtime. And Clemson's easily a top 3 team in the ACC. So don't sleep on South Carolina. Ken Palm does have it 82-70, which is right on mark there, but I think this one's closer. Kentucky, defensively, they have sprung a huge leak. They are absolutely pushing the pace, and offensively, they're getting it done. They're the second in offensive efficiency, but their defense has slipped outside the top 100, and they are just bleeding fantasy points to multiple positions. They gave up 98 to Ole Miss, 89 to Arkansas. That was the home game that the return of Calipari, and then another 75 to Vanderbilt, 102 to Alabama. 90 to Mississippi State. Like, defensively, this Kentucky team, they're just struggling. Not having Lamont Butler, especially the last few games, that has been a huge, huge problem, as he is clearly their top overall defender, especially on ball. Not having him around, that is just very tough. Officially questionable still. He's actually more playable now than he's been at any other point. I still think he ends up not going in this one. But for those keeping track at home, this does sound like it's a very close possibility that he does actually play. So we'll see. This is the first time in a while where it's felt like that. We also have Jackson Robinson, who's popped up on the injury report as questionable. That's pretty bad if they are out without him as well. One of their better outside scorers. Does condense down minutes quite a bit here, starting with the Kentucky side. We still have a relatively cheap Kobe Brea, who's more of a scorer shooter type, but at 5'5", playing 30 plus minutes for the most part. Still obviously a look. Otega Awi at 8'4", he would be the best overall play. Amari Williams, price is up to 9K after a couple of strong performances. It's eerie they've been losing, but Amari's playing the best basketball of his season thus far. Very spendy at 9K, but definitely a GPP worthwhile look. Ainsley Almanor still starting, even though Andrew Carr came back, but I think that might switch here soon. Andrew Carr did play 23 to 24 minutes in their last game, while Almanor played under 20. So we're going to see that pendulum shift. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see Andrew Carr start. If Andrew Carr starts at 4-8, I'm very interested. And even if he doesn't, I'm still looking at having some exposure. You guys remember last Kentucky slate, I had said, hey, if Carr starts, I'm going there. I don't expect anybody else to, but I'm going there. He didn't start, didn't use him, and he ended up having a pretty solid game overall. And like I said, played more minutes than Ainsley Almanor there. 10 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Carr just, I mean, he's able to do a little bit of everything. They really need him. They need him to start playing closer to 30 minutes if he can shake off that game rust from missing time. This is a player who, throughout the non-con was throwing up 30 plus with regularity. And during his time at Wake Forest, he was one of their top 3 guys every single game. So Carr is not a 4-8 type of player, and that is why I'm looking at him like, yeah, if he's going to start, I'm absolutely all in. And even if I don't, if I can expect him to play somewhere between 24 to 26 minutes, as you can see here, projections like him as well at that minute, at 24 minutes, putting him around 4.38x. I expect him to start over Almanor. And if Jackson Robinson is out, that kind of seems like almost a no-brainer. We did see some of the freshmen like Travis Perry and Trent Noah get some additional minutes. They both played 14. Colin Chandler only played 3, but the game before that, he played 15. So just doing some experimenting, getting those guys more time as they play through these injuries that they have. None of them really interesting from a DFS standpoint, unless you're multi-entering, max entering some of the large field GPPs. Sprinkling in a little bit of Perry and Noah, especially if Jackson Robinson is out. That might help Colin Chandler to a degree. We'll see how that news shifts. But main takeaway here for me on Kentucky is if Andrew Carr starts, I'm going to be all over him, pretty close to all in. Now, on Kentucky games, we usually like to stack for and against them. That is a team that there's actually 4, maybe 5 teams, and I say it all the time. If one of these teams is on the slate, here's your flow chart. Are they on the slate? Yes or no? If yes, proceed to stacking the hell out of them and their game. UCF is one of those teams. ASU is one of those teams. Iowa is one of those teams, generally against them. And Kentucky has become one of those teams. They were kind of already that way with some of their mini stacking capabilities, but with the way they're playing defensively and how high total games they've been involved with here lately, we definitely want to have mini stacks of this one at worst. The problem is nobody is comfortable with South Carolina, and I wouldn't blame you one bit for being a little bit worried about doing so. Looking at it, I had an affinity for the freshman Arden Conyers, but he only played 5 minutes in the game against Texas A&M. Kind of felt like a waste. He should have gotten more minutes. He's been one of their better bench pieces. Sophomore Morris Ugasuk did drop out of the starting lineup as we expected. Jamari Thomas got back in, and the bench really just, nobody standing out there. All played less than 20 minutes. Morris Ugasuk did score 12 points as he hit 4 threes, but he's become pretty unreliable off the bench. Much more interested in him as a starter. Basically comes down to this with South Carolina. You're going to pay a premium for one of 2 players, which is Colin Murray Boyles at $10K, which is a significant amount of money to dedicate, but you can see, do have him close to 41, 42 fantasy points there at a 35-minute projection. And then Jamari Thomas, who missed a few games. Thomas is the one I think could be a big trouble play for Kentucky, and one that I don't know will have that much ownership. I just feel like South Carolina is going to be that team people gloss over. Knowing that Kentucky gets involved in these high-scoring affairs, people are going to get exposure to Kentucky. I'm sure of it, but I don't know that South Carolina will get that same love. Jamari Thomas, since returning from his a couple game absence, he has been absolutely tearing it up. 19, 5, and 2 against Mississippi State, which equated to 34.5 fantasy points in a close loss. Then in another close loss to Georgia on the road, 19, 1, and 3, 27.7 fantasy points. And then the close loss to Texas A&M, 15, 5, and 5. He has 8 steals over those 3 games, which has propped up his fantasy score a lot. He's also scored in double digits in 4 straight games as well. And he's taken 12 plus shots in 2 of his last 3. He is priced at 7.3, which is typically a spot people have trouble going to. We're paying these, up for these studs, and we're looking for those values. The 7K range just gets ignored by the masses. So I do think we have a little bit of Posh-esque vibes here when it comes to Jamari Thomas. Not sure I'm quite there with him just yet, but I do really like him in this game and want some exposure somewhere, whether that's in an alt build or not. But he is in contention for my main lineup. 24.3% usage rate, second on the team behind only CMB, and he's shooting 37% from long range on 78 attempts. He also has a 23% assist rate, a 3.5% steal rate, and he's drawing over 5.5 fouls per 40. So lots to like for Jamari Thomas. He's got some Mighty Mouse vibes. They list him at 5'11", but when you watch him play and you look at him, I'm pretty sure he's more like 5'9". We like it. We love those type of plays, the Josh Hubbard-esque type plays. There hasn't been a lot of talk about South Carolina this year. It's been a rough year for Paris, Lamont Paris and company, but this team definitely has some guys who can play, especially in CMB, but don't sleep on Jamari Thomas as well. All right. Yes, screen was frozen. I actually had a difficulty there. My computer dumped, so I apologize for that. Just wrapping up the South Carolina game there, and yeah, my laptop threw up all over itself. But we're back. We're out here. Let's move on to the next game here, which is Oregon versus Michigan State. But again, just a kind of quick recap of the South Carolina game. Kentucky side, Andrew Carr, if he starts. South Carolina side, I don't know if I have the luxury to play CMB. Very nice option to have. But Jamari Thomas, a little bit of a sneakier look there. I think he thrives in a game like this. All right, Oregon versus Michigan State, total of 147. The Spartans are 8.5-point favorites. This is a game that I think is going to also be pretty ignored by the masses, and I think I'm in that camp as well. Oregon has become really difficult to use, trust, do anything with from a DFS perspective. And they seem, there was a lot of chatter in the non-con about how this team is going to make some noise. But they have really struggled here lately, and they've looked mortal. Imagine that, the Oregon Ducks looking mortal. So not a lot of interest in this game overall. God, I have so many things going on here. I apologize if I'm in and out here again. Now this is messing up. All right. So the first one is Jadrian Tracy, who's dealing with a couple of injuries here. He's not questionable or anything, but he has been moved to the bench. The reason I'm bringing it up, he's very cheap at 3.7, and if he were to jump back into the starting lineup, he's at least playable, even though it is against Michigan State. It is an early morning game. Body clocks of the Ducks still. I know that we're, halfway through the season. So these new West Coast teams, we're in the Big Ten, getting a little bit used to playing these early games cross country, but it still takes time. Trust me on that. So I think that we see Tracy at least a chance that he starts in this one. He only played the 6 minutes off the bench, but generally when he does start, you look through his logs, he plays over 20 minutes for the most part. So at 3.7, definitely a worthwhile value there. Tentatively have him just kind of placed at 15 minutes, but if he plays that 25, 26 in a starter's role, he is a pretty nice look that should be able to get 15 to 16 fantasy points even against the likes of the Spartans. So that's another one where if he starts, I'm involved. If he doesn't, I'm not going to try to play guesswork. 6 minutes off the bench, he might still be ailing a little bit. The fact that they took him out of the starting lineup is extremely telling. The options that are going to play a lot of minutes: Jackson Shellstad, Keyshawn Bartholomew, TJ Bamba. Then you have Brandon Angel and Nate Biddle rounding out the starting lineup. Nate Biddle there at 7.2. It's a pretty cheap price for him, but I just hate the way that they don't have their offensive sets that they run. They get away from Biddle a lot. And Bamba, I mean, if you remember him from not his Villanova days, but his Washington State days, he's never seen a shot that he didn't want to take. And sometimes it disrupts the flow of the offense. Sometimes he keeps them in it single-handedly, don't get me wrong, but it does lead to a lot of empty possessions. Biddle was pretty sound against Michigan in that road game last time out. He scored 16 points. It was one of the better games he's had in the last month, but I just have real trust issues with him right now. But that price of 7.2 is such a big dump. I wonder if that brings some ownership to him, but it's a tough environment going on the road there at Breslin and then facing just a seemingly endless front court for Michigan State. And they will rotate through them all, likes of Xavier Booker, Jackson Keeler, Carson Cooper, all of these options that they have, Cohen Carr. So Biddle is going to have his work cut out for him. Seems like a real genuine foul spot for him. The Michigan State side, it's just extremely hard. We know I've had some success going to Michigan State, like the Trey Holloman game against Minnesota. He hit 3 threes back to back to back, but then it got out of hand, and then the second half just disappeared. We've seen Jace Richardson go nuts for a half. There's just so much continuity issues. We see a different rotation in the bigs. Sometimes it'll be Carson Cooper. Right now, Carson Cooper's the hot front court option. He's playing over 20 minutes, putting up huge numbers. But then we've seen it be Jackson Keeler. We've seen Cohen Carr have the big game, Xavier Booker. So it's just really difficult. You can play them when cheap. Like Carson Cooper at 4.3 is actually kind of interesting. At 20 minutes, he's close to value, but I can't guarantee that he's going to get that because we could very easily see Cohen Carr then play 25 minutes and ride the hot hand. We have seen Jackson Keeler's minutes dwindle down, which has caused his price to go from 7.5 all the way down to 4.8. Again, that's a pretty interesting price. Makes all of these Spartans guys GPP looks at best in the front court. On the guard spot, they just kind of cannibalize each other. They're all a bunch of 3X type performers, which isn't bad. I mean, Holloman's 5K, Jace Richardson's 4.6, can definitely get close to value at those prices. Jeremy Fears at 5.7. Jaden Akins projects pretty well at 5.6, as you can see, because of all of his shot volume. But there's just not a lot of overall upside with this team. To me, Holloman is the best guard that Michigan State has, but Izzo there's an unwillingness there to play any of those guys above 25 minutes, which makes it really tough. So tread carefully, but the prices are admittedly very, very cheap. Jackson Keeler is one, I think, if you're running multiple lineups to get a sprinkle, and then Jace Richardson at 4.6. We've seen he can get hot. We've seen defensively can rack up steals as well. Good opportunity against this Oregon team. Maybe catch them napping a little bit or still asleep, if you will, on this one. So Michigan State, definitely like them as a betting favorite and a little bit of exposure here, but not my favorite game for DFS purposes by any means. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have Texas versus Vanderbilt, total of 149.5. Vandy is a 2.5 point favorite, and that might make you do the whole Tim the Toolman Taylor, dropping the pop culture on you guys here tonight. But there are some injury woes here for Texas, and going into a deceptively hostile and deceptively hard place to play, like on Vanderbilt's court. It is a situation where I think Texas could be prime for a loss here. Ken Palm does have it 76-75, but something about Memorial Gymnasium just absolutely knocks teams off course. Texas has some players to be interested in as well. Starting with the Texas side, Tremont Mark is going to be out. Mark has really kind of, struggled to find his health this season. He has been just now starting to heat up and kind of rise up the pecking order for Texas. Against LSU, he had that massive 18.4 rebound, 4 assist game. That was like vintage Tremont Mark. But then against Arkansas, just couldn't stay on the floor due to an injury. Only played the 21 minutes, very ineffective, and now he is officially listed out. We also have an injury designation for Caden Shedrick, who also suffered an injury in the Arkansas game, so he's officially questionable. Cost him time as well. He played just 19 minutes. I do think he will attempt to play. So I do have him penciled in for some time here in the projections, about 25-ish minutes, but I don't think they're going to be too effective. So that does leave us with Arthur Kaluma and Trey Johnson, who are fine pay-ups. They're going to have a ton of volume and a massive amount of usage and all the minutes that they can handle. Arthur Kaluma at 7-7 is a really nice piece. He doesn't get enough hype throughout the industry, and he doesn't get a lot of rostership either. So he's a nice look. Trey Johnson is someone we typically seen pretty highly owned, but much cheaper priced than 8-8. So Kaluma is definitely a look here. And then we've got our value run. Julian Larry, Jordan Pope, Jason Kent, Zenrik Onyema, all of those guys. Kendall Weaver is still going to be out. So you have a lot of cheapies here under 5K. Larry there at 3.9, Kent at 3.3, and Onyema at 3.5. Those are kind of secondary values to me. I'm circling in on Jordan Pope at 4.4. We've seen Jordan Pope in spots before when the offense was stagnant or somebody was hurt or banged up or foul trouble. He has no problem coming in and just chucking. 25.3% shot rate, second highest on the team behind only Trey Johnson, who's sitting there at 32%. He's shooting 36% from long range. Pope was a gunner the last couple of years for Oregon State, as you probably remember. And when you dig in a little bit deeper to see what games he's excelled in. Lately, he's been pretty terrible because Mark's ascension, but he's still playing 18 to 20-ish minutes. Expect a nice boost here. And he also is remaining a starter, so that is still a good thing there for Pope. And we're talking about a player who just about 2 weeks ago was priced at almost 7K because of a huge performance he had on the road against Oklahoma. Okay. 27 real points and 2 rebounds for 37 fantasy points. And that was a win that he's basically put the team on his back. Shot 17 times in that one. We've seen him take these high volume of shots at different points before. He also had that 50 bomb against New Orleans in late December. Took 21 shots in that one, scored 42 real. The guy can score. If nothing else, he can score. He's probably going to brick a lot here, especially on that Vandy court. He's not used to playing there. But at 4.4, he's a really nice look. He's probably a top 3 value on the slate for me, especially with Tremont Mark out. And I think a lot of people are going to feel the same. And you can see his projection in about 28 minutes at this price, well over 4X. A lot of people are going to be on him most likely. GBP pivots bring you to the likes of Julian Larry and Jason Kent, the Indiana State transfers. Both of them are somewhat interesting, especially Larry, who played 28 minutes in the Arkansas game. Hasn't shown much upside, but at nearly 4K, he can definitely get 16 and pay off. The problem is I think Pope, for only a few hundred more, might put up 25 plus potentially, just on volume alone. Vanderbilt side, they project pretty well. Various looks here. Jason Edwards and Devin McLaughlin are your top 2 options. If Caden Shedrick can't go, it leaves Texas really lean in the front court. Zenrik Onyema will have to absorb a lot of minutes, Devin Pryor. And those guys tend to be a little foul prone, and they just don't give the team heavy minutes. McLaughlin does for Vanderbilt. So I think you see him absolutely wreak havoc on the glass. McLaughlin been an elite rebounder throughout this season. He early in the non-con, he was putting up some monster, 15 plus rebounding games. And when you look at it overall, he has the 15.2% offensive rebounding rate. That's top 30 in the country, and a combined rebounding rate of 39%. High level stuff while still maintaining a 40% make rate from long range on 45 attempts. 12th highest offensive rating in the country, 8th best effective field goal percentage in the country, 15th best true shooting percentage in the country. I feel like Devin McLaughlin doesn't get enough attention from the masses, and I'm guilty of that as well because I don't really look to roster him very often. He had those 250s early in the season against teams with barely a pulse, and then he's just kind of been churning it away, 22, 24, 27 regularity. He has not had a lot of games where it was like, oof, he really busted. That could have hurt someone. Obviously, nobody used him against Tennessee. Back on the 18th, he had just 13.5 fantasy points at 7K. But since then, against the likes of Alabama, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Florida, 3 of those being road games, he has registered at least 26.5 fantasy points on DK. He scored 10 plus real points in all 4 of those, and he has pulled down 6 plus rebounds in 3 of those 4, which includes a 14 rebound game against Alabama, which is a DVP spot, mind you, and a really solid effort against Florida. They did lose that one 86-75, but he put up 14 and 8 before eventually fouling out in 28 minutes. So I do like McLaughlin here against Texas, especially if Shedrick can't go. We'll look at some McLaughlin rebounding props there. Jason Edwards is a scoring dynamo. I can see him and Jordan Pope battling back and forth. He is cheap at 6'2", definitely playable, but not a priority on this slate. Texas still has some decent defenders left over, even without Mark. And then Jalen Carey is an interesting GPP look at 5'1", 20-plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3. He was really good against Florida before fouling out. He has upside for days. He just has no consistency just yet, which is tough for him. Then you have cheapies such as Tyler Nickel, MJ Collins, Chris Mannion, and Tyler Tanner. Chris Mannion's interesting. He's only 4K. Gets starter level position, but the minutes he splits with the likes of Tanner, Nickel, so he's kind of stuck at 20. I do like Tyler Tanner at 4K, who does project fairly decent here at about 22, 23 minutes. You see right over 16 fantasy points. So definitely some, second level value that you can look to if you're building out your player pool and trying to get a little bit different, or some of the non-chalky values below 5K. I do think Tanner is at least playable in this spot, and MJ Collins as well as somebody that I could consider. But I think I want McLaughlin and nobody else here for Vanderbilt, along with my man Jordan Pope on the other side. But we'll be monitoring the news. That is the second wave of games at the 10 a.m. hour, 1 p.m. hour for those of you on the East Coast. All right, moving on to the next game on the slate here. We have Michigan versus Indiana. It's a total of 152.5. Michigan 2.5 point favorites. The big news here is it was rumored for a while, and then Indiana wasn't going to announce it just yet, and that Mike Woodson was considering retirement or stepping down from the program. But wait no more. They decided to just go ahead and say at season end, he's going to step away. And I think that was probably the smart decision. Instead of dragging it out, it kind of lets the students take control of how they want to finish out this year, and they can make that decision of, okay, I'm going to stick around and see who they get in as coach, or I'm going to hit the transfer portal, see what else is out there. And then there's the talk of will they step up for Woodson in his final year, or will it be a lame duck rest of the season for them? I tend to lean it'll be a lame duck rest of the season, but you know how it can be. Sports, there's a lot of mental side to sports. Those of you who have played it, you can get really hyped for something like this, a death in the family, a coaching change. There's various things that can really hype up a team. So we'll see if this is one of those things. Definitely a tough spot for the Hoosiers here against Michigan. Malik Renew is exceptionally cheap at 5K, and I expect him to be heavy chalk. I am definitely pumping the brakes a little bit. This is one of those times where I don't want to play a guy just because everyone else is. We've had major discussions in the FTN CBB DFS Discord lately about lineup constructions, when to roster somebody who's going to be highly owned, when to not. When you spit out your optimal and you've done all your research, and then you come back and find out ownership wise, oh, everybody's going to be on this guy. I wasn't really on him. My research says he's an okay play. Everybody else seems to think he's an elite play. I guess I have to play him because everyone else is. And then he puts up a 2x, and then you're kicking yourself in the ass. Whereas you fade that player and they brick out, and then you have a huge leverage over the rest of the field. Hunter Dickinson against Iowa State the first time is a very good example of this, not the second time. So this is a really weird spot for me with Malik Renew, because he can absolutely destroy this price point. Now against Purdue, he did foul out in only 8 minutes. And he was pretty popular at 5'8". And then against Wisconsin, he was popular again because he's only 5'9". Didn't foul out, but he only managed 17 minutes there on the road. They had a pretty rough go of it. They made the score somewhat respectable there towards the end, but that was a game they just didn't seem to be in too much. So expect him to start, but clearly the knee issue that caused him to miss some time is not where it needs to be here. Since returning, he's only eclipsed 15 fantasy points once in 4 games. It's just a really weird spot. I think that the front court of Michigan can really give him trouble. It is a home whistle, so hopefully he doesn't get into foul trouble, but I just have no faith in Renew. And it's less about having faith in him and more just like, obviously Woodson can't coach very well. He's better than Doug Gottlieb, so I'll give him that. And I think that they ultimately lose this game to Michigan. It's a game they need, but it's just, I don't know what to do with this team right now in this rotation. So price is cheap on Renew. Price is cheap on Miles Rice as well. Rice sitting there at 4.8, 30 plus minutes to theoretically be able to hit that very well. You're starting to see that this slate is taking shape as a stars and scrubs type of build with all these various values. And then it's worth noting Bryson Tucker, who I do think has a very bright future wherever he goes, played 24 minutes against Wisconsin, 9.6 rebounds. And we've seen in flashes on a fantasy point per minute basis, Bryson Tucker be pretty damn good. I actually really like him. If he were to jump in the starting lineup, which he won't, I would actually probably be well overweight on him. I think he's a really sound option for this team. Great overall rates too, 20% usage rate, 23% shot rate. Does have a combined rebounding rate just a tick over 20%, draws about 3.5 fouls per 40. And oh yeah, he's only a freshman, so a lot of growing up to do for him. So kind of tough to play him if he doesn't start, because he could play 4 minutes, he could play 11, but generally now that he's back from his own ailment, he's been getting some minutes and he's somewhat interesting. Omar Ballo is very cheap at 7.9. We've seen him be, well over 9K before, well over 10K even. He's had some struggles. The 2 road games against Purdue and Wisconsin were not favorable for this team, so it's caused Ballo's price to drop down. And overall, I just feel like there's a ton of trappy prices here for Indiana, and Ballo is definitely one of them. So be careful with Renew, be careful with Ballo, Rice, all of these guys. I know it seems like, oh my God, they're so cheap, we got to slam them in there, but it's really quite tough situation to be in. And if you do roster like in a Mackenzie Mbako or Renew, it's going to really irritate you to no end when Luke Good steps in and knocks out 5 or 6 threes on 20 attempts, which we've seen him start to smash again. He had a down game against Maryland, and suddenly Luke Good has put up 21 plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5, and he sits there at 5.3K. So again, tread carefully. It does seem like Anthony Leal, now that he's, Renew's back healthy, his minutes are going to evaporate, so you don't have to really look at him either. On the Michigan side, there is a DVP look here. Guards versus the Hoosiers has been a very good spot for us. Michigan has several playable guards. Namari Burnett there at 5'8" is my favorite. You can see all of these guys, their whole starting 5 pretty much projects over value. Trey Donaldson is at a reasonable 6.8K price, and then Roddy Gale at 5'4". Expect Gale to probably see a spike in ownership. We have seen him be pretty popular regardless of slate size there, and Donaldson definitely makes sense in a more balanced approach. And then you have the two front court players, Danny Wolf, who went nuts last time out, Vlad Golden, who was just okay, but we've seen the pendulum swing back and forth on them. Sometimes it's Golden, sometimes it's Wolf. I almost never recommend playing both of them together. It's a pick your poison situation. Golden is cheaper right now at 8.2. Wolf at 9.2 is a very affordable price. You can see the projections like him quite a bit. It just comes into a foul situation here with Ballo. It's not the safest play to use him in this spot at that price, but he's definitely a good overall look. Probably more of a GPP look for me, and rather target these guards, one of Gale, Burnett, or Donaldson. Will Schroeder got hot last time out. He's priced at 3.7, but unless he's knocking down every three in the first half, that's not typically a play you're going to see. I did see some chatter about him earlier in other places, but that just seems like a very unnecessary value to try to look at. All right, let's move on. We'll keep it rolling here. Next game is Wisconsin versus Iowa. This is the highest total on the slate at 162.5, and the Badgers are 5.5 point favorites. And should be no surprise to you that, yes, this game has a high total, and yes, this game projects quite well on both sides. Now, lucky for us, we have something to compare it to. Iowa and Wisconsin have already played once this season. Let's pull up the box score on that. Of course, they had Owen Freeman during that one. We know at this point Owen Freeman is out for the season due to the finger surgery and probably transferring to a place like Creighton. Speculation. So they played on January 3rd. Feels like a lifetime ago. Wisconsin at the Kohl Center, they'll be at Iowa this time, scored 116 points. Iowa scored 85 in their own right. It was a massive high-scoring game. In that one, Drew Thelwell scored 25 points. Josh Dix had 16. Owen Freeman had 14 and 3. Peyton Sandfort was horrible. Basically got into early foul trouble, never got going, scored only 2 real points. Price Sanford off the bench scored 10, and our guy, Seydou Traore, had 4 points, 2 rebounds, and an assist off the bench in 13 minutes. More on him in a second. On the Wisconsin side, John Blackwell hit 6 threes, 32 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists. It was a type of score that, yes, if you wanted to win GBBs that day, you had to have him. Nolan Winter had 18 and 8, despite Adam destroying his career in the blink of an eye by rostering him too much early on. Winter has been having some struggles here lately, but a nice bounce back situation for him against Iowa. John Tanya had 12 points in that one. Max Klesman had 8 and 6 assists. And then Stephen Crowell had 14, 7, and 3. Off the bench, Kamari McGee hit 4 threes, and he said the infamous line in his presser, "We knew Iowa didn't want to play defense. They never want to play defense, and we obliged them by making lots of shots." Kamari McGee, well said. So in this one, we want some exposure. Obviously, on the Iowa side, Freeman is out. Seydou Traore got the start. We kind of anticipated that in the last Iowa slate, and he looked pretty damn good in the first half. He was pacing really well. Unfortunately, he picked up a second foul about midway through that first half. Never really got back into the game. He played 2 minutes in the second half, and it was very frustrating. Riley Mulvey, a collar option there, he was actually somewhat effective defensively, so we saw him on the floor more. Lash Dembele really didn't play all that much, and offensively, the best out of that group in the front court on the bench is Bryce Sandfort. So Price played a 24 minutes, and he was out there offensively, Mulvey out there defensively, and it just left Traore in this weird position where he just kind of got, for lack of a better term, game scripted out because other guys were playing better than him. I do expect Traore to start one more time. This is one of those classic spots where everybody was on him last slate. Nobody will be on him this slate. He's priced at 4.6, so he's not a supreme value. We haven't hit a game yet where we didn't have at least one sub 5K play that, hey, we can use in our main lineup. So we have all these options, but this is just one of those classic. Seydou Traore goes from 50% brick to 5%, 6x or more. Not the greatest of matchups, but they are at home. If he can keep out of foul trouble, I do like Traore to hit value in this one. It's a big if. It's not a main team play. It's a GBP look. But how many over the last decade of playing DFS and however long you've been playing, yes, you there watching, know how often these plays come back to haunt the very next slate. Picking the guards outside of Peyton Sandford is nearly impossible. We know Sandford's going to get a lot of usage on the wing and kind of doing some facilitating. But Brock Harding, Josh Dix, and Drew Thelwell. Thelwell was the play on FanDuel. At least I thought he was. He didn't have such a great game there. It ended up being a Josh Dix game. But just as quickly as Josh Dix goes off, we could see Thelwell. Thelwell's only 5.5 there on DraftKings, so he's to me the best overall play from a pricing standpoint. Josh Dix up at 6.7. It's a little spendy for him, but without Freeman, clearly he's going to have a ton of usage. And then Brock Harding, who came off the bench as well. They did a little bit of a shakeup there, if you will. We knew obviously they had to replace Freeman, which they did with Traore, but we also saw, or what they did with Riley Mulvey, excuse me, but they also started Seydou Traore over Brock Harding in that one. And I do have worry or concern that Harding jumps back in the starting lineup there over Traore. They needed some size against Purdue. They can get away with a smaller lineup against Wisconsin here, depending on Winter and Crowell's ability to stay on the floor. So I think we see a Harding, Mulvey, Thelwell, Dixon, Sandford starting lineup. Or we could even see Price Sandford. So that leaves us with Price, who's there at 4.2. He's very much in play. I know at 23 minutes, he projects around 3.7x, not the highest, but I do think the projections underrate him slightly, especially if this gets out of hand or Iowa's, Fran starts looking for a new job here sooner rather than later. I think that we could really see this one get away from them quickly and their season just basically end right here and now. And that could mean more minutes for Price Sandford, more garbage time for him. So I'm definitely very interested in him. I think he's an elite GPP look value. Don't know if I'll be brazen enough to use him over some of the value that is going to get a guaranteed more minutes, but it would not shock me if Price Sandford was the highest scoring player under 5K for this slate. On the Wisconsin side, the temptation here is to just plug in John Blackwell. He scored 32 against these guys. He has been on a tear for the most part since that game, but he's had a couple of down games here as well, and that has caused his price to drop down from where it got to be 9K to a very affordable and reasonable 6.6K. He's failed to reach 30 fantasy points in 4 straight games. Tougher opponents though: Nebraska, Maryland, Northwestern on the road can be a little bit tougher than it looks. And then the Indiana game, which, guards versus Indiana, but that one just got out of hand so fast. He did take 12 shots. He only made 3 of them. So it was a bit of a problem, but he did pull down 8 rebounds as well. And again, go back to January 3rd when they played Iowa that last time or the first time, 32, 8, and 5. Quick calculation, 52 fantasy points. And that was during a stretch where he was ripping and running 34, 35 plus. So I like Blackwell. I think he's absolutely the option to use over John Tanye. It's a 2K price differential. That means I think Blackwell will see probably some pockets of ownership, maybe higher than even I want to admit, while Tanye will not have a lot of rostership. So if you got those multi-entries, going to Tanye and paying up for him in 1 or 2 makes a whole lot of sense. And don't write off Max Klesmit in a matchup like this. He got hot, hit a couple of threes against Indiana. He was the guard that nuked them. Had 6 assists in that one, which is pretty impressive, and 3 steals. He put up 32. Don't look now, but Klesmit suddenly scored 20 or more DK points in 3 of his last 4. But he's 5'6", not 4'6", and I appreciate DK doing that because I don't feel bad about fading him at 5'6". I would feel bad about fading him at 4-6 in this matchup. No, so they did us a little bit of a favor. Then you've got the front court starter, Steven Crowell, only at 5'6". Really interesting if he can avoid foul trouble. Definitely a spot he can do well. Again, 14, 7, and 3 in his first meeting with them. And then Nolan Winter, who has really struggled in the back, this isn't even the back half, like the middle part of the conference schedule here. He's had some struggles. He's only eclipsed 20 once in his past 3, twice in his past 6. It's definitely been tough. but 18-8 against Iowa. It's a good matchup. 5.3 it's kind of a value price for him, and I'm certainly interested. Again, anytime Iowa's on the slate, we want to stack their games, and against them is usually the way we want to go with it. So you see Stephen Crowell projects extremely well, Nolan Winter projects pretty well, and then of course John Blackwell as well. So I think we want to come away from this Wisconsin game with two pieces, right? One guard, one forward. Just pick between Winter and Crowell. They're pretty similar in price, and then pick Blackwell over Tanya for your main. Take Tanya in a GPP alt, and you're ready for war. On the Iowa side, we'll see if they shake up that starting lineup, but I do think this is a spot to look at Drew Thelwell, and he will have minuscule ownership there at 5.5. I don't know if I'll get to Peyton Sandfort. I suspect he'll be mega chalky once again. He's 8-3, taking a bunch of volume. He ended up putting up a huge score when he put up 40 plus there without Freeman. So expect his price to probably continue to move up. And until it does get above 9K, I expect the industry to be plugging him in with regularity. All right, next game on the slate, and it's my favorite. If I had a producer, this would be like, a spot where we pull away for some fancy graphic and music. But UCF versus Baylor, total of 157, second highest on the slate, but it's going to go over that. Trust me. I am the USCF whisperer. I'm going to take that title on, and I feel great about it. It is an 11-point spread. I don't know about that. UCF plus 11. It's extremely live. I guess it'll depend on a few things, namely being the injury situation here for Baylor. So let's get them pulled up on the screen here. Now, earlier I said there are 4 to 5 teams that when they're on the slate, we want to stack for and we want to stack against. And one of those teams happened to be UCF, a team that the industry continues to ignore en masse. We have gotten so many good games at low rostership from Keshawn Hall, Darius Johnson, Mo TM. There's no reason for us not to continue to do it. Until others catch up and start playing UCF in their games too, we just need to continue to fire away and take advantage of that. And they're playing an extremely fantasy-friendly Baylor team, whether it's on the road or not. Key Hall's actually been better on the road. My man Adam is big into these road and home splits here, so he should like himself some Key Hall. This is going to be a great one. Fantasy-wise, this is the game of the slate. I know Iowa, Wisconsin is there. Kentucky and South Carolina is there. But this is the game of the slate, and you want to come away with 3 pieces from it. I am line in the sand, very, very confident. You need to have at least 3. If it's 2 Baylor, 1 UCF, fine. If it's 2 UCF, 1 Baylor, that's even better. I am certainly planning to go right back to Keshawn Hall. I just, if it's not broken, I don't want to fix it. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I just want to continue to play this guy who is an absolute star, tearing up the Big 12. Gives Kansas 50. He's going to give Baylor 50 as well. But Baylor, injury situations. VJ Edgecombe is still questionable. Langston Love also questionable. Edgecombe did miss their last game, so we'll monitor that. Love has been out for about a month now. Still dealing with the ankle issue. They did get Jeremy Roach back, so that was good news. And Baylor's rotation has just been a blessing for DFS purposes. And they've had a pretty soft schedule. Throw out the Texas Tech game, which they really struggled in, but Kansas, which they beat, that was fantasy friendly. Took BYU to overtime. Threw up almost 80 on Utah. Kansas State game, that was a pretty good fantasy friendly game. TCU, they lost that one, but both sides put up huge points. Arizona game, just continually, Baylor games have been fun. They're 13th in offensive efficiency, 60th in defensive efficiency, but they have just bled fantasy points to everywhere. The rotation was about 6 deep. You count Jason Asamada and his 3 minutes 7. But without Edgecombe, I would expect them to once again play 6. So Baylor mini stack in play here. Robert Wright played 39, the other freshman there next to VJ. He has really, come into his own, sets the table, but also has proven himself to be a capable scorer. Jeremy Roach, who came back and played 38 minutes there, 12.7 rebounds, 2 assists, solid. Norchad Omier, who stayed out of foul trouble, and this is key. Norchad stays out of foul trouble. He plays 35 to 36 minutes. If he doesn't, more like 27 to 28. They just don't have the bench to replace him when he does get into foul trouble. 16 and 12. Light work for him against Texas Tech. They lost, but he looked really good doing it. Jaden Nunn played 33 minutes, and then Josh Ojiawana, who also has his own level of foul issues, played 29. Off the bench, we saw Jalen Celestine play 23. So even if Edgecombe returns, you're still looking at a 7-man rotation, very short. Really just hurts Nunn and Roach at that point. Without Edgecombe, Robert Wright is a 7-1 price that will be overlooked. Again, that 7K range you can really find. That range is where Posh Alexander and the whole Posh play came into effect. That range is where Posh Alexander was a lot his first and second year of St. John's. And really just you discover a lot of key, sneakier pieces there in that range. And I think Wright definitely qualifies there in this UCF game, which, if UCF keeps it close and puts it to overtime, even better. Norchad Omier is a solid 9.3K price point going up against the UCF front court. I think he does do a good job staying on the floor this time. I would actually be a little bit worried about using Motiam against him in this spot. Then you have Roach at 5'6", obviously going to play heavy minutes there. And then Josh Ojiawana at 4'9". Any of these options are fine. If ranking-wise, because I know I'll get asked that, would be for me, assuming Edge comes out, Robert Wright and Norchad Omier, Jeremy Roach, then Ojiawana, then Celestine, and then Nunn last. Not a really big Nunn guy, even though he's 5'1", which is a good price for him and his minutes. Just doesn't really pay off this 5K plus price very often, even with all those minutes. So he would be last on my list there. And I'm probably not rostering Celestine either, but that's just how I'd rank the 6-man rotation. UCF side, all about my man, guard forward eligibility, Keyshawn Hall, the big guard, as they've begun to call him across the internet and media alike. Very good, very solid player. 9.8K. I'm happy to pay it. He will be low owned. He was like 3%. Might have been a little higher, actually, because I think all the FTN community had him. But you see, 50 against Kansas, 44 against TCU, 37 against BYU. And then the Cincy game, like, he had 6 turnovers, and he kind of struggled there, right? Shot at 8 of 18. They lost by 10 to a struggling Cincy team, but he still put up that 23, 7, and 3, and he could have done even more. And funny enough, in the BYU game, he only played 27 minutes because he got foul trouble in the first half, and still almost put up 40 despite missing 10 minutes of the first half. Keyshawn Hall is great. He is going to absolutely deck Baylor. He does it against everyone. There's very few teams who have been able to slow him down in conference play. And you look at the splits there, only 5 true road games compared to 16 home games, 42.5 fantasy points in those 5 road games compared to 29.9 at home. Way too short a sample to really derive anything from that, but Keyshawn Hall is based. I also like Darius Johnson. This was a sneaky move last slate at Cincy, or against Cincy, to use Johnson with Hall. Both of them were super low owned. Darius Johnson, can't forget about him. Can fill up the box score. 21, 5, and 6, really one of his better performances there against Cincinnati. Kansas, that game where they really pushed them at their house, 19, 3, and 5 with 4 steals. It's the second game in his last 3 in which he's eclipsed 30 fantasy points. I think he does it here again against Baylor, playing majority of the game. So we have to consider both him and Darius Johnson. Now, I mentioned I'd be a little bit worried about using Motiam. He's been really rock solid as well since returning from a short absence there with his own various ailments. Managed 32 minutes against Cincinnati, 32 against BYU, and even stayed on the floor for 27 against Kansas before getting into some foul trouble there. I just have a lot of concerns here on the road against Baylor. I think this one might turn into a little bit of a higher pace game, lots of possessions, and just more opportunities for TM to get into foul trouble. Norchad Omier has amazing low post front footwork and can do some things here. TM Ojiawana, like perhaps just physicality there, is going to land with Mo on the bench, I think. So I do still want exposure, but I don't think I could possibly put him into my main lineup over the likes of Hall or Johnson, especially when he and Johnson are within $400 now. Do have a bit of value with Debo Dallin-Combe in there at 4.7, who had a really strong first half against Cincinnati and then just couldn't stop fouling in the second. We don't really need him, but it just kind of speaks to how many sub 5K values there are on this slate, and kind of a mid-range Jordan Ivy Curry, who has a high shot rate, but definitely further down in the pecking order here when UCF is completely healthy. Again, 2 to 3 pieces from this one at minimum. Key Hall, Darius Johnson together with like Jeremy Roach is a pretty strong approach there. Norchad O'Meara, if you have the salary, playing Hall with O'Meara might be a little bit difficult. But when I look at the likes of Coleman Hawkins, Stephen Ashworth, Hunter Dickinson, Colin Murray Boyles, and Ryan Kalkbrenner, who's been good, all those pay-ups, Hall and O'Meara look pretty good compared to the rest of those guys, especially knowing what we know about UCF games and how fantasy-friendly they truly are. All right, moving on to the next game here, we have Kansas versus Kansas State. It's a total of 140.5. Kansas is a 4-point favorite. And really just have to talk about the fact that Bill Self, obviously one of the best coaches to ever do it. I could never sit here and play armchair quarterback and be like, I know the rotation's better than he does. How could he not do this? He should do this. Trust me, I know, and he doesn't. Like, I would never say that and mean it, but you have to wonder what the hell with Flory Badunga. Even the CBS guys were talking this morning on their podcast, like when they were talking about Kansas, one of the featured games, they do a betting segment at the end of their pod, and this is one of the games that they were picking. And they, Gary Parrish, Matthew Norlander, that's their show. They both were like, said in jest, they'd rather bet on will Flory Badunga play 15 minutes over under 14.5 minutes. And he's played 14 and 15 over the last 2 games. He had 18.5 fantasy points in 14 minutes against Iowa State. So, yes, KJ Adams is back playing 30-plus minutes, but Flory Badunga is clearly the best player. I don't even think it's questionable. He's the best player on Kansas. Impact's winning the most. Elite rim protection, elite rebounder, can score, starting to develop some post moves when he's out there. Not much, but he has them. He showed them off against Houston, and suddenly he's playing 14 minutes a game. So, whatever. As far as the starting lineup goes for Kansas, we did see Shaquille Moore out of the starting 5 as they input KJ Adams back in. And not only did Shaquille Moore fall out of the starting 5, but he played only 2 minutes there against Iowa State. David Coit, who's bounced around minutes-wise, only played 9. We saw A.J. Storr play almost 20 off the bench, but Rylan Griffin and K.J. Adams inserted into the starting lineup here lately at the cost of Badunga and Shaquille Moore. DeJuan Morris, Hunter Dickinson, Zeke Mayo, they're all fine looks. Kansas State, they're not in that top 5 of games where teams you have to stack, but they've been involved in some pretty fantasy-friendly games themselves, and I did like what they ran out there in their last game rotation-wise. That was in their close 71-70 win over Arizona State. They went 7 deep. And the starters, Brendan Housen, Max Jones, David Ngason, Coleman Hawkins, and Doug McDaniel all played 30 or more minutes. Ngason, Hawkins, and McDaniel all played 36 or more. Off the bench, we saw C.J. Jones play 11, and Moby Ikorukwa, who is a sophomore, true sophomore, played 13 minutes. We didn't even see the likes of Ugana and Yenzo, barely any David Castillo. Just really ran those starters into the ground there. And I'm curious to see if they do something similar, because if they do, kind of interested. The prices are up slightly from where they were, but Ngason's still very much in play at 6'8". Doug McDaniel's a strong look at 6'2". I think Max Jones is a nice GPP look at 5'7". He's taking on more of the scoring load, and he's hitting some tough shots. Kansas State got off to a really poor start against ASU. It was 17-0 before they made their first bucket at the 11-minute mark, and they came back to win this game. K-State, say what you will about how porous they've been, and they have been, but they can fill it up in a hurry and score in droves, and they can put together some pretty impressive stretches. So I do think there's some playability here with these guys against Kansas, but they're clearly second tier. I would look to Max Jones and Doug McDaniel, with David Ngason being maybe my favorite look there, but none of them are going to be priority plays. And on the Kansas side, AJ Storr at 3.6, who would have ever thought, right? Who would have ever thought that he'd be that price and we wouldn't really be considering him? And then Rylan Griffin there at 4.3 as a starter is somewhat interesting, but I think ultimately it's just a Rylan Griffin, AJ Storr splitting a 36-minute package. So nobody there on Kansas unless you tell me Flory Badunga is going to play 35-plus minutes, because if he does, I want all the Flory Badunga, and I want Badunga season to continue. It's just fun to say. All right, last game on the slate, Marquette versus Creighton. This one comes with a total of 144.5. Creighton is a 2.5-point favorite. Creighton is a good team in terms of their rotation is short, so we know what to expect. We can pay up for guys and at least know they're going to be on the court. And they've also been a pretty fantasy-friendly group for the most part. Their games have led to some extremely high scores. Can't help but think the short rotation of Creighton, especially lately when you watch games, guys are starting to tire out a little bit. We saw Stephen Ashworth play low to mid-30s here recently, but he did play nearly the entire game last time out. So I think they're going to try to get these guys breaks when they can instead of playing Jemiah Neal, Stephen Ashworth, Ryan Kalkbrenner 39 minutes or more each game, because that is tough, regardless of how peak conditioning you are. Kalkbrenner is very expensive at 10.8. I think that's going to be a tough call. Marquette is not the DVP spot in the front court, as you know. He just hung a 62 on Providence, such a huge, huge number. So that was 35 and 12. I think more often than not, we're going to see Kalk give us a solid 18 and 10 type of stat line, which is great. Puts him somewhere in the mid-30s. That salary price, though, at 10.8, we're just going to need that 50 plus. And I think we can do a little bit better and spend our money more economically. But I will say there's enough value on the slate to make it happen. So Ashworth there at 9.5. I don't find myself using him too much. We have the guard forward eligibility with Jemiah Neal at 8.1. I do like him, even with the slight price bump. He has been rock solid and just converts in all categories, making him one of the more appealing Creighton plays. He's come a long way since last year's ASU production. Jackson McAndrew is there at 4.4 as the fifth starter next to Jason Green, who's pretty much splitting with Mason Miller and Isaac Trout. McAndrew has played 25 and 24 minutes over the last two. Definitely a scorer, but still that problem of second half minutes, although he did play more against Providence, but that game was kind of out of hand there for a while, and I think that may have been the probable reason there. And same can be said for Fedor Zugic, who I really like, played 22 minutes against Providence. Really thought his minutes were going to be trending up, which they were, but he played only 7 in the close game against Villanova, which leads me to believe that still not quite there yet. In a game against Marquette, where it's going to be one possession pretty much probably throughout, I don't think Fedor ends up playing that much, so tread carefully there. His time is going to come. We also don't need him. We have so much other value, so we don't have to get too cute there with a play like Fedor Zugic, but just file him away for later. And then on the Marquette side, you can see pretty much everyone who's relevant is projecting quite well. Cam Jones once again. Cam Jones is only priced at 8.5, but he's not a lock and load play. I know a lot of people are going to think he is, but we can't forget that we just went through this with him, right? He's failed to get over 32 fantasy points in 4 straight, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we're used to Cam delivering these 40-plus games with regularity, and that's just not happening. A lot of it has to do with the fact that teams are obviously at this point in the season, throwing that extra defender on him, harassing him, and forcing him into bad shots. That's number one. But also number two, without any Tyler Kolek types around, he's just shouldered on such a huge amount of the offense. You can tell he's gassed out, and when he's gassed out, you just can't run this Cam Jones offense, having him shoot 20 times a game, playing 38-plus minutes, and not expect some level of fatigue to set in, and it definitely has. Now, Marquette did play Creighton back on January 3rd. That was a 79-70 win for Marquette. And that one, Cam Jones put together a really solid stat line, 22 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists. Gave him 45 on DK, which at 10-5 was okay. At 8-5, it's really more than okay. Shot volume still there for Cammy. 15, 20, 13, 14, and 11 over the last 5. He's just not hitting that bigger number lately, so it's felt like a fail, but that gives us a cheaper, reduced price Cam Jones. Tough because he has burnt some people, and I know there are some in our community alone who just don't want to roster him, and I don't blame you one bit, but spot's great. It doesn't get much better than that. Obviously, if you played DePaul, it would be even better, but close game. They're going to rely on him. Now, there has been the problem with Cam of picking up fouls early in games here lately, and that also leads me to believe that he's heavily fatigued, because you see that with guys reaching or lazy type fouls because they're just gassed out. So pulling up that Creighton box score, Stevie Mitchell had 18 points and 3 steals. Cam Jones, of course, put together the 22, 9, and 5 stat line. Those two carried. And then on the Creighton side, Ryan Kalkbrenner had 16 and 12. Stephen Ashford had 13 and 10 assists. Jackson McAndrew also had 10 and 6. Pretty solid stat line. Hit a couple of threes in that first half before sitting out most of the second. Trend continues. So certainly some playable guys on both sides here. You see Cam Jones, but also Chase Ross at 6'5". He's really stepped up on offense where Cam Jones has started to struggle. Stevie Mitchell has these just random FU type of games. I would rather play Chase Ross over him, but he's definitely playable at that range. And then, of course, David Joplin at 6'1". That's a really interesting price for Joplin. I think he fits a more balanced approach build. Joplin can get hot in a hurry as well. And then Ben Gold all the way down there at 4K. Gold's one of those values who doesn't pay off all that often, but you feel pretty safe when you roster him, because you know he's typically going to give you around the 15 to 16 you need. Now, he's really struggled over the last 3, but 2 of those 3 have been against UConn and St. John's, plus defenses for the most part. One of them against Butler, and the problem there is Andre Screen took his lunch money. So Gold struggled. That's led to the big price drop. Going up against Creighton, it's not as if things get any easier dealing with Ryan Kalkbrenner, but he did have 8.6 rebounds, hit a couple of threes. He is a versatile big man who can hit threes. I think people forget that, and I actually like him in this spot against Creighton. And I don't expect him to be more than 5-6% owned. So another value that potentially goes overlooked by the masses. We did see big minutes from Royce Parham and Zadie Lowry because of that foul trouble on Cam Jones. Lowry had a big first half. He had a couple of threes and put together 12 real points in the first half. Scored 24. He scored 13 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3. Priced at 3.7. We normally don't look to Marquette bench pieces, but maybe Lowry's starting to force his way in there. And if he is, that hurts Stevie Mitchell long-term and David Joplin. So keep that in mind. And then Royce Parham, 24 minutes against St. John's, 19 against UConn. He's been less productive, but he's a pretty solid upper-tier three-point shooter. And when he comes out there, he is looking to fire away, has the green light. He also blocked 3 shots against St. John's and looked a little bit more athletic than I imagined. So Parham and Lowry look like they're starting to force their way into the rotation more, but they would be better suited for a slate where we're starved for value. My God, there's all these pay-ups. Everybody's overpriced. What do I do? I could stomach Zadie Lowry at 3.7 in a slate like that. Can't do it so much when we have this seemingly endless supply of values at our fingertips. So that will wrap up the slate quick for the most part here. I will pull up some best bets that I have. Let me get the teams added or back added here so we can look at the overall number. All right. 9 games, by the way. Couldn't they give us a little bit more? I kind of settling in with the 10 to 12 gamers. That's my preference. Curious if you you guys are watching on demand, or when you're watching on demand, drop in the comments there what you prefer, what kind of slate sizes you prefer. Because I'm always curious. I know there are some who have DK's ear to a degree, and kind of say, oh, I like this size slate, or this about the product. So I'm just kind of curious where you guys stand on that spectrum of larger slates versus smaller slates, edgewise, all that good stuff. So in the comments there, make sure you drop your opinion, letting me know what you think, and I'll circle back around and read those tomorrow before lock. If you do it on demand, I will most likely be knocking out for just an hour or two after the show, and then back up bright and early, going right at it in the war room. We're a little too old for the all-nighters now. Those wreak havoc on me physically, especially with these little kids running around that I have. But in March, I do pledge that there will be very little sleep. I won't sleep until every one of you has cleared a seat in the Mania or a big takedown. So my mission is clear here. All right, here we are. Let's go up here and see what we got. Now, minutes are edited based on what we know for the news. I did go through and do that before the show. So we had an accurate representation, or at least as accurate as possible. You can see here near the top, Josh Ojiawona, Cam Jones, Jeremy Roach, John Blackwell, and our man Darius Johnson. So sticking out there, exactly what you would expect. A lot of Baylor. There's some UCF pieces in there, Marquette, Texas. That's the big takeaway there. And then, of course, a few pieces of Wisconsin. But Baylor and Texas, both with injury situations, both with depressed pricing players. So it stands to reason why those guys are popping so well. The three-man core for me at this moment, I think confidently will say John Blackwell going up against Iowa there. That's just such a favorable matchup. Second, and posh play pay up, will be Keyshawn Hall. And I know Hall, he projects at 3.7. I'll do some manual edits because I earlier in the season, he wasn't this like monster that he is. And in the conference play, he's just separated himself into like a first team all conference caliber type player. And I do have him myself for about 39 to 40 fantasy point floor in this game. Projections have him right around 3.77, but I definitely think he's much better and putting up 40 plus. So posh play, because he's going to be low owned, Keyshawn Hall, John Blackwell, and then the value pieces here, safely Jordan Pope. But I will say if Andrew Carr starts, he would become the number one value for me. Looking at the various options here and all the values that we've talked about, I just trust Andrew Carr a lot at that price, starting and playing possibly 30 minutes. You got to sign me up for all of that. Ownership-wise, I think we see a lot of Cam Jones. I think we see a lot of John Blackwell, Roddy Gale, Jordan Pope, those types. And then I'd be curious to see where a player like Devin McLaughlin stands as somebody who projects really well. And then also those Wisconsin forwards, Stephen Crowell and Nolan Winter. That gives you an idea of where the ownership will be and who the popular or the most popular options are. All right. So best bets here. James Madison +1 versus Toledo. Like the Dukes, we've done pretty well with these small 1 to 2 point dogs here, and basically evenly matched games. And so taking a spot there +1, I think that's just too favorable for JMU. There is the Sun Belt MAC Challenge taking place tomorrow with, I believe, 8 games. So you're seeing a lot of intra-conference matchups here late. One in particular that stood out to me was Appalachian State versus Ohio. Appalachian State +5 there versus Ohio. The Bobcats have dealt with their share of injuries and banged up options. Defensively, they're middling under Jeff Bowles this year, but they're playing fast as ever, 37th in tempo. KenPom does have this as a 70-68 victory for Ohio, but they have some really nice pieces themselves. They've won 2 of their last 3. CJ Huntley, Miles Tate, the former Butler transfer, Dior Connors, like they have a really strong group of players there. And I do like Appy State to not only cover, but to actually win outright as well. So official bet there is +5 for App State, but we'll sprinkle the money line. Shout out to one of our producers in CBB DFS Discord regular, Adam Superman Young. Dropping the knowledge. Monmouth, they have been absolutely unstoppable at home here. I don't want to butcher the stat, so let me check my note here. I put it down because I didn't want to say it wrong. If I'm going to give the info, we got to say it right. All right. Monmouth, they've won 19 of their last 20 home games the past 2 years. Towson has won 9 straight games. Monmouth coming off their last home win in which they were small dogs. They're 5-point dogs at home, +5 versus Towson. That is Adams' play, giving it on his behalf, but I'm a little bit perturbed. I wish I would have been betting Monmouth home game sooner. But shout out to him because we did get on them last game, and that paid off handsomely. So I'll trust them here against Towson. Towson, one of the better teams in their conference, but give me that Monmouth home cooking that they have. Alabama State -4 versus Grambling. I have picked on Grambling numerous times over the last month of the season. I like Alabama State overall. I think they're a decent enough team here, but it basically comes down to Grambling just being so porous. Ken Palm does have it 72-66 in favor of Alabama State. This is a team in Grambling, one of the worst offenses efficiency-wise in the country, 347th, and then defensive efficiency sitting there at 283rd. Just it's all bad. A road game here against Bama State, they're just not going to do well. And it's a shame because Grambling State has some players on their rosters that are pretty fantasy friendly. Ernest Ross, the former NC State player, Contavious Doser, Antoine Burnett. You may remember this Grambling State team. They were on the slate early in the season against Ole Miss and Florida, but it just hasn't worked for them. They've struggled. They're 6-16 despite having a plethora of talented options. So all that to say, Alabama State -4 versus Grambling is one of my favorite bets of the day. And then lastly, UTSA +1.5 at home versus ECU. UTSA cashed at +1.5 on their last home game for us as a featured bet. That was against was it home game against Tulane. They lost by 1, so take that to the window. Same exact situation here at home against ECU. Similar in almost every way as that one, except this will be probably higher scoring. But Ken Palm does have this 75-74. But either way, I like UTSA to just win outright or to lose by only 1 point once again. So we are all over UTSA +1.5. All right, we'll end this with prize picks, and we have 3 that I like a lot. There'll be more, of course, but these are the 3 that I found right now. Stands and fantasy points category be up in the morning. But Keyshawn Hall over 17.5 points all day, 20 plus real. Let me get it. Tyler Harris over 12.5 points. That is the Washington Husky guard who has really stepped up for Portland transfer. He was double 2 games ago and game against Nebraska. Lose that one, but he was pretty good. So over 12.5 points there for him. And Derek Johnson over 2.5 rebounds and assists. I know, Mike, you're out there somewhere telling me no PRA. Get these low 122.5 PRAs for guys like Darius Johnson or Kadary Richmond who just have the ball in their hands every waking moment. It's just such a favorable number. So we'll take that one as well over 20.5 PRA. We'll release some underdog plays for the subs in the article that drops right early as well. But we hit it DFS, picks, and bets. I feel great about where we stand. Again, the flip has been switched. We're on our way. We're very confident that somebody in the community, whether it's the viewing audience here or in our Discord, going to get a takedown. Going to win the $30 qualifier for a seat and going to win the 5K first PPP. I'm calling it now. FTN member somewhere out there, one of you is going to have a huge day, and all of us are going to be profitable for sure. The green screens and the window trips in our futures. Let's get it. Appreciate you guys. Take care. No outro music this time. Working on it. See you guys on